I don't know. What is it?
Love, true love, and showing off.
Okay,
Anyway,
that's a good
that's
one.
my joke.
That's
Sorry.
a little more blue than we usually do on this, but we might
Yeah,
edit that one out.
it's better.
I,
It's better not be a recording of some kind.
do you know what's brown and sticky?
Sounds like my dog.
No, a stick. All right, Eric. Well, very, very good to meet you. Thank you so much. Uh, Matt and I have talked a lot about you, and it's really nice to get to see your face and get a chance to meet you. I want you to know, I lived in Tewksbury, Massachusetts for about a year, and I saw that your dad lived in Lowell, so very
Oh
close by.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's the closest I ever got to Lowell was Tewksbury. I don't know if I ever went to Lowell. In fact, it's not very far, but I don't think I ever did. But I was in that whole area. Otherwise, mostly flying model airplanes out there.
really. Uh, I've right now started a. I mean, not started. I've been working on a project for a long time now, but it takes me a long time because I've got a lot of stuff I'm doing. But I am all my life I wanted to find a model of the Grumman goose because 70 years ago this past August, my older brother and I had our first flightman airplane, and it was from Grumman up to Falmouth Forsyth. We landed in the water, taxied up to the back of my father's boat, got out and sailed for 2 weeks.
Oh wow,
But so I'm building this radio controlled goose, which I hope will survive its first flight.
very cool. Very cool. Well, we should before we go too much farther, we should introduce ourselves. I think everyone knows I'm Jim, and I'm the instigator of what we call the Hall Bulldog Project.
Yeah.
Which is a replica of one of your dad's famous designs. And we have Matt Lawler on. Matt, go ahead and introduce
Hi,
yourself.
I'm Matt Lawler, and I am the project historian. So I find out all the little bits of history and all the dark little corners of the world.
Yep,
You're amazing at it too, I have to say.
he
Thank
is.
you very much. I appreciate it. Although, you've given me a lot of it over the years, Eric. We just
And Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Well, I'm the son of Bob Hall, and that painting in the backgrounds of him, and there's a lot of basically I have a wall in my office. But anyway, so I'm his son, middle son, and I went to the went to Deerfield Academy near where Matt grew up in Deerfield, Massachusetts. Went to the University of Michigan, got degrees in aeronautical engineering and naval architecture that were combined at the time so you could study to become a hydrofoil or hovercraft boat designer, and that's what I wanted to do at the time. And then worked at Grumman for 3 years after college. I'm most proud of the work that I did on the F-14, where my job was working on the skin, boron composite skin of the stabilizer of the F-14, which at the time was supposed to be an experiment. And I only worked there 3 years, but my job was to figure out how to attach the layers of boron to a titanium stepped picture frame around, and the way the steps work, and that was the computer program was called STEPS. And basically, the more layers you had, the more steps you had. But as more layers became less layers, and then more layers again, well, there were more and more steps, and everybody thought, well, this is going to be really great, except how do we transition between 6 steps to 4 steps to 2 steps? And it came to me one night, so I talked to the guys about it, and I thought, well, that's a really good idea. So here, it's your design. So I figured that thing was going to be, they were going to test it and say, oh, that's a pretty good thing. And I left Grumman, and the head of advanced composites we met one time, and so I said, so how did that test go on that prototype skin? And he said, well, it worked fine. It broke at 110%. It was perfect. So our stress guys figured it out right. And Anyway, was they got titanium skins on that thing now? And he said, no, 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 no. Every plane has got the boron skin on it.
Very nice.
First plane to the last plane. So every time I like Top Gun, but at the start of it, you may remember where they're doing the takeoff ops and the catapult shots.
Mhm.
The planes, just before they take off, they wag the stabilizer
Yeah.
tail.
Yeah.
And it just gives me shivers every time I
Yeah.
see it. So anyway, then I got into the marine business and eventually had my own mast making company, which lasted for almost 40 years. And we ran into trouble after the big downturn and never really survived it. And so the business got sold. It still exists, but my brother and I don't have it anymore. And then I started another company making, and I don't know if you guys sail, but halyard locks for locking halyards on sailboats. And that's working out okay. It's keeping me in beer money and stuff like that. But I also, and I see your keyboard in the back,
Yeah.
and I could probably aim this over and show you
Very nice.
another one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but I don't play the keyboard. I have it. It was my granddaughter's. She got sort of tired of using it, and it can go back to her anytime she wants to take it up again. But I got it so I could learn how to play, and I've been playing violin for over 6 years now. And I've always wanted to play by ear. My mother was a great pianist. Again, if you look around the room, that's my mother, and she's playing the piano, which she always did in sailing group with sailing groups and stuff like that. And but she played like by ear, but I've yet to be able to play by ear. But I work on the violin all the time. Like I practice every day and stuff like that, but I'm not at all very good at it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then lifelong sailor, and the business was sailboat masts, and so I've done an awful lot of sailing, mostly on other people's boats, mostly customers' boats. I could probably feed you more, but it's kind of BS.
This is great. No, this is very good. It's why we're here, is just to talk a little bit about yourself, and then of course about your dad as well. Obviously, the focus of this this discussion is naturally going to be centered a bit around the Bulldog, because that's what we're working on. But anything about your father is very interesting to us. It's a matter of preserving history. So
that one last thing, but I think probably the biggest thing in my life, and it's getting to be a 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the book I'm writing about him, that I've now probably in its 22nd or 23rd year, and Matt has helped me get back at it, and now I've done substantial work on it since, and I've got Matt involved in it so he could sort of be a pusher on it. And
so when do you think that book would come out?
You know what I'm thinking? Well, I keep thinking that I have these goals which never happen. This model was going to fly last July, and it's nowhere near it yet. I was thinking maybe I could do something late spring, but I think if it came out about the same time as this airplane flew, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things that sometimes take longer than you expect, don't hold us too much to the date we've set, though we are hoping we'd have it done in 2022 and August 15, 2022. That's the goal. We've had a number of people who know a lot about this tell me, well, that's not possible. And well, so what? I don't care. Maybe it isn't, but we have to have a goal. And that's a really good goal. The 90th anniversary of the aircraft. Why not try for that goal? And if we reach that, then the dream would be to fly it for 10 years and then retire the airplane on its 100th birthday. That's the dream. Why not have a dream, right? Maybe we'll be a little late. Who knows? But we're going to get seriously.
Why do people tell you that that's
right? Because
unrealistic.
Because
one in like 2 months, right?
Right.
So we can do this.
Right. I think that the expertise just isn't there as much. We're not going to have 20 people working on it, and also what we want out of the airplane is different. So one thing to think about is we don't need an airplane just for one race. We want an airplane that can survive and be reusable, for 10 years. And that's a lot different than what they were doing back then. Of course, they needed an airplane that would last maybe a year, but not really be flown very much in between the races. It's just a different environment now. So I think that adds to it. But I agree if we focus on it. Hey, many times I've had many times in my life people have said you can't do something that just makes me angry. So I just go ahead and try and do it. Why not? So tell me what it was like growing up with your dad. What kind of guy was he?
I guess let's see. First of all, and this is starting from sort of the negative, but not much. But he could have an explosive temper, and but that really is totally inconsequential. For us kids, he gave us huge. He gifted us with self-reliance. We raced, all of us raced in the Bermuda race on the family boat by the time we were 13 or 14, and did a lot of sailing offshore and just a lot of sailing. And I think for people that don't realize it, but sailing is a huge confidence builder, especially offshore for young people. And we usually, when we were kids, do either of you guys sail?
I did for
No.
a little while, but not in many, many years.
All right, well, when we were growing up, all of our sailing class friends around Long Island Sound sailed boats called the Blue Jay, which was maybe 12 feet. But we, at a very early age, Ned was 14, I was 11, Ben was 9, we got a 17-foot Thistle, which was a grown-up's boat. It wasn't a kid's boat. And we liked sailing that, and we started to do pretty well in our local fleet, which was a lot of boats. And a lot of people were Grumman people. And after the first year, we started winning a lot of races, and those people got just roasted on Mondays by my father. I said, Jesus, what's the matter with you guys? Just these couple of kids are kicking the shit out of you guys.
Yeah, that's great.
And then one time we wanted to go from Huntington to Larchmont, which was maybe 15 miles, I think. Larchmont was in Westchester, and Huntington is on the North Shore of Long Island in Suffolk County. And we said, Dad, could you tow us to Larchmont with a boat? And he had this 56-foot Ocean Racer. And he said, well, no, I'm a working man. I got to work. I'll tow you out to the end of the bay, but you guys can sail the boat to Larchmont. And we put all the duffel bags in there and the food and everything in there, and we ended up sailing there. They said, how are we going to know it's Larchmont? Well, here's a chart.
Yeah.
We used the chart before. Finally, we were sailing by Larchmont when we saw this sort of tower, and let's see what the tower was on the chart. You could see the chart. There was a tower, and it was right about where Larchmont was. So then all of a sudden we turned right 90 degrees and sailed into Larchmont, and we did it. And we were so proud of ourselves, and he gave us that, and we had a very, very long rope, and he just trusted us. And in my particular case, I like to draw, and he kept saying, keep drawing, you're really good at it, and if you can draw like that as an engineer, you'll stand out.
Yeah.
And so I could draw very, very well. And, but he encouraged that, and he was right in the end. I mean, when I was talking to people as an engineer, sketching stuff up, I really could converse more effectively than a lot of the other engineers, because they couldn't freehand draw. They could use a ruler and stuff. And I think it's helped a lot. I've learned since the company closed, I've learned something called SolidWorks, which is 3D modeling. You probably know.
Yeah.
What is the 3D modeling that they're using on the plane, apparently, that I've heard about?
On the Bulldog that we're working on?
Yeah.
I think our engineers we use Maya and we use 3ds Max. Those are the two we use.
Okay.
Yeah, we sometimes use Blender as well.
Yeah. All right. I don't know any of those, but anyway, SolidWorks is a version of this, and it's probably easier for me because I could, I have a feel for shapes and stuff like that. I've learned to have a feel for shapes, but I think that comes from my father.
Mhm.
He when something really strong happened, he was very quiet and very calm. You'd think you'd just really screwed up, but he was very calm. And if I think when I cracked up my bicycle once, I thought, oh man, I can't. What's Dad gonna say? What's Dad gonna say? And all he said was, "You okay? You didn't get hurt or anything, did you?" And I had one time where me and this friend of mine were wheeling down this back road and near our home and going around a corner, and this other car was coming around the corner, and they stopped short, seeing us coming. But I couldn't turn fast enough and just went head on into this car, bounced off my bike onto the trunk of the car, and then rolled off, and didn't, I was scared and didn't hurt myself or anything. But this bike had a very good profile of the front of the car and the front wheel of this English bike that I had. You could see the bumper and the whole shape of the front car. I said, "Oh no, one of my fathers, he just got this beautiful bike. What's he going to say?" When I got home, he said, "Look, give it to me. Let's get the front wheel off. Give it to me, and I'll see what I can do." And he had shop guys in the at Grumman who would do anything for him, on the side and stuff. And that wheel came back that night perfect.
Oh, that's great.
They fixed it. So he was extremely good with people in the shop.
Yeah.
Part of my book is verbal histories, and just listening to a verbal history that I took not a couple of days ago with Dick Hutton, who was a prominent engineer at Grumman, and he mentioned chuckling. He said, "Yeah, your father." I said, "What was he like in the?" This was an interview 23 years ago. What was my father like in the office? He said, "Oh, he was okay." And he said, and then he mentioned, but he really had a lot of friends in the shop. And he had his boat, and he could get stuff made for his boat.
Mm-hmm.
And they called them, they called these kind of jobs G jobs, government jobs. And his nickname was G Job Bob. Anyway, he never gave us anything. Everything we did, we had to work for, even if it, for instance, I can still remember that my older brother and I split a week's allowance of $1. My older brother got 60 cents and I got 40 cents. And that was to pay for chores. Like, you get up in the morning, he had to, I forget what my older brother had to do. Maybe he had to empty the dishwasher. I had to.
And what year would this have been? You got 60, you got 40 cents. What year was this?
Probably when I was 8 or 9, maybe. So I was born in 43, figured out 51, 52, something like that.
And that was per week, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do the math later and see what that is today. I'm curious what that is today.
No, but but we also got paid well for cutting the grass and stuff. And
so your dad believed in self-reliance. He believed in that he was a competent guy, and he assumed you were competent. That's what I'm hearing here. He was an engineer. He knew how to solve problems. He wanted you to have that same thing. Did he grow up the same way? Did he grow up in an environment where he was able to kind of explore and be self-reliant as well?
Oh yeah. First of all, it almost sounds like he was an accident because he was born when his next older sibling was maybe 18 or 19.
Mm.
And, but he was very close to, well, first of all, his father, who divorced his wife, was an extremely good engineer. He's got many patents, and he's the guy that developed the freezing process for the Bird's Eye Company.
Okay.
And Dad's was very close to his. I'm just trying to think. No, his. I guess it was. No, I guess he was very close to. I'm trying to think of the guy's name was Eddie, because I also had a cousin Eddie who was the guy, a son of another guy. But anyway, he was the next youngest to my father, and they were all very close. And he, like his father, was very good in a workshop, knew how to use all the equipment, all the machines. Dad could use all the machines. He had good machines in his shop. So he grew up learning this stuff, and he would make steam engines and run them in power boats, model power boats. And they went apparently very, very fast. He said one went about 30 miles an hour. So
Wow.
they were, yeah. And he
Pretty serious.
loved the steam engine. And then very late in life, after he retired, he made a steam engine and then a gas engine by just sending away for drawings. And then he made patterns, and then had the patterns cast up, and then he machined all the patterns. And the memorable day, one of the most memorable days of my life, he says, I said, how's the gas engine coming? He said, well, actually, I just finished it yesterday, and I wanted to run it today. And the damn thing just started up.
Yeah.
Just started up.
Yeah.
That's not me.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to see the machining work I do, and neither would he. I think he would be embarrassed.
Yeah.
I could use this stuff, but I did it only because I couldn't wait for my own ideas to see fruition. I had to make them myself, and they were horrible.
So let's just talk a little about your dad's childhood a little bit. He grew up in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And in Lowell, basically.
Right. Yep.
And when did he leave Lowell?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably to go to Harvard.
He went to Harvard, which is I'm sure everyone probably knows is in Massachusetts as well,
right
on the Cambridge River down there,
right.
near MIT.
He was there 2 years, and
the Charles River, rather. Mm-hmm.
He did get booted out, and I'm still trying to find out how. But as Matt will tell you, I do describe one way he got booted out in the book. But right now, that's urban legend. He was. I have him getting drunked up and riding his motorcycle up and down stairways in his dormitory, and waking up in the morning with the dean tapping him on the shoulder saying, "Out."
And is that's true or not?
No,
true?
I don't know.
Let's say it's true. I like it. It's true.
Yeah,
I think it's a great story.
That's a good story. It's true. As far as I'm concerned, it's true.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing it. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And then he went off to Michigan, and more or less behaved himself there, I guess.
Yeah. Now, when did he meet his wife, your mother?
He met his wife working at Fairchild.
Okay, and that was after he graduated from Michigan.
Yes, and he went straight to Fairchild.
Where is Fairchild located at that time?
He was in Farmingdale, New York.
Okay, so kind of came near back home a little bit, which was good probably. And how long did he work at Fairchild?
He worked at Fairchild maybe 2 years, and then he went up to work for the Granville brothers in their repair shop. Matt can tell the story better than I can. They had a seaplane. They were building a seaplane, and they needed engineers for it. And my father and Bob Ayer went up there. Bob Ayer, a lifelong friend. The story follows Bob Ayer and my father all through their life and well past where the book ends. It seemed like every time Dad went someplace, it was because Bob Ayer said, "You really ought to come here. It's a good place to work." So in 1929, I believe they went up to Boston Airport, and they had the Granville Brothers had a repair shop at the airport, and then they finally made their own biplane, and then caught the attention of some people in Springfield, Mass, who said, "Why don't you come to Springfield and relocate Granville Brothers to Springfield?" And I believe that was end of 29, maybe early 30. Is that close, Matt?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
I mean, I have all these dates in the book. I just
You're doing great. You're doing great. So he met his wife while he was working at Fairchild.
yeah, she
And-
was she worked at Fairchild.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be his first wife.
Oh,
First
I'm
wife.
sorry.
Yeah.
So that was not your mother. I'm sorry. Is that your mother?
No, that was not my mother.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so I said that wrong earlier. Let me go back and kind of recap the story. So he grew up in Massachusetts, in Lowell, and goes from there to Harvard. From Harvard, we have a great story where he gets kicked out of Harvard. True or not, who cares? Then he goes to Michigan, graduates, is hired by Fairchild, and they're in Farmingdale, New York, where he met his first wife. What was her name?
Eugenia.
Okay, and then they divorced eventually, or what happened
They
there?
divorced in probably 35, 36, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was a relatively short marriage.
Yes.
That marriage lasted all throughout the racing period of his life, and then from Fairchild, the Granville Brothers at that time were operating out of the airport in Boston, but then eventually moved to Springfield, which is when your father joined them in Springfield.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
They had developed the biplane before that. They went to Springfield, and that's when they started working on the racing planes, really in earnest. Is that right?
Well, they first had sport planes, and then
Mm-hmm.
they saw that there was a cross country derby in 1930 advertised, and so they entered it, and they did surprisingly well, and also won some money off it. And they in 1931, or maybe before 31, but they decided that in the Depression, one way you could make money was race airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
So in 31, they built the GBZ, which was basically sponsored by many people in Springfield. And one of the stories is my father would work at night on the thing and pound the pavement during the day trying to raise money.
It is.
And anyway,
There's a picture of the Z right there,
there's the Z. Yes.
and that's your dad in the cockpit.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And do you know where this picture is taken by chance?
I'm going to bet that's in Cleveland, but I don't know.
Looks
I
like
think
it.
he's right. I think that's actually Cleveland.
And that would have been 31.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how much of the design work did your dad do on the Z?
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
So-
There was a guy and who signs his drawings, Brad, and Matt knows was it David Bradford, Matt?
Steven Bradford, yeah. He did
Yeah.
the drafting.
So he was the draftsman, but my father basically designed the airplane.
Very neat. I have a picture here. It's a blow up of a newspaper picture, but that's your dad with the Granville Brothers right there.
Right.
And did your dad talk a lot about that period of his life? It was kind of a short period to a lot of people that are aviation enthusiasts. It's a very important period, but it wasn't really it wasn't decades. It was just a couple of years. Did he talk about that era very often?
Never.
Never.
No, I didn't. He would answer questions,
Yeah.
and but he just wasn't anybody that was interested in the history. And one of his comments to an interviewer, he just said, why do you want to know about the past? Ask me about the future. And one of his letters, I love the comment, and I've kind of copied it in certain circumstances since. But he said to the guy, if you're not surprised that I've answered your letter, you should be.
Yeah. Not the kind of thing he would normally do.
Yeah.
But somewhere he must have given you some kind of sense of what it was like to be in that. It was a really exciting era. I'm sure it was also no, it wasn't exciting. It wasn't exciting to him.
He
just didn't do it.
He never ever talked about that era.
Okay. So have you learned everything you know about his time in that era from other people? Is that fair to say?
Yeah. For instance, I can remember being in a place it was called Toy Town, but they had a great model airplane section.
Yeah.
And there was a Hawk made some small racing plane models. You have probably seen Hawk models, but
yeah.
And there was one of a GB, and my mother was saying, that's your dad's plane.
Yeah.
I said, oh, really? Is it? But he never, ever said anything like that. And one time, just because I had a lot of time on my hands, maybe it was on a vacation, maybe it was summertime, I decided I wanted to draw a really nice pen and ink picture of this airplane that he had very interesting color scheme. Although it was black and white pictures, so with pen and ink, I didn't have to worry about the colors. But I drew this picture of this beautiful airplane, the Cicada. And finally, when it's finished, I showed it to him. I'm very proud of the picture. I said, so Dad, whatever happened to the Cicada? And then he told the story.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this story.
We'd love to hear it from you.
Well, he just said the plane, he just told it very quickly. He said the plane took off and veered and flew into the roof of the hangar, burst into flames, and nobody could do anything.
Yeah.
That was as much as he said.
Yeah.
And as Matt can tell you, a few people tried very, very hard, but there was no chance to get to this pilot. The plane, it was just an inferno very quickly. But anyway,
your father was among the people who, when the Cicada hit the building, actually ran to the scene and climbed to the roof with fire extinguishers, just trying to reach the pilot. But several of them got badly burned just trying to get to him to save him, and couldn't do it. But yeah, it's.
He would respond to people asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the worst thing is not knowing what you don't know. And I didn't know what I didn't know about airplanes. About the racing things. And so if I didn't ask, he wouldn't offer anything.
Right. How would you learn if you didn't know what to ask? And yeah, you'd have to have some.
One of the things in the book that's killing me is you asked when my father and his first wife met, but I never asked my parents where they met or how they met. So the book portrays something to do with sailing and stuff, but it's an invention.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids know where we met because we like telling the story and they like hearing it, my wife and I, but he was not like that. But we had a lot of people around all the time. When he worked at Grumman, he was basically kind of the father of the test pilots. He was first. He still has the most first flights in Grumman history. But when he became just sort of head of the test pilots, but no longer a test pilot, all the pilots, he was kind of the father of all the pilots. And if he wasn't the father of them, he was certainly a close friend of them. So every year, the best party in our house was the pilot's party. And these guys are amazing. You can just imagine, everything you read about pilots and like
Yeah.
Navy pilots, it's not an exaggeration. These guys knew how to talk, knew how to get drunk. And we heard a lot of stuff from them, but it was only Grumman stuff,
Yeah.
his test piloting there. And Bob Ayer could have told us, and we knew Bob very, very well all our lives. But he and my father were kind of the same. My father worked at Stinson. Ayer got him to come there, and then he sent him a book about Stinson, and he signed it. Well, here's a book about Stinson. You probably don't care, Bob. Ayer, Ayer. And the book tells about Ayer and Hall, and there were a couple other Bobs at Granville, so they had to all call each other by their last name. So, and I can remember all my life that they called each other Hall and Ayer.
That's awesome. Now, Bob designed a bunch of really neat aircraft for Grumman. Of course, we kind of covered his work for Fairchild a little bit, where he kind of cut his teeth on designing aircraft. And then from there, he went to the Granville brothers, designed the Z, and I think the Y, and maybe they designed the X as well. X, Y, and Z, all three of those.
I'm trying to think. I just looked up the X, and I think I just looked up the X, and it was something.
The X was the Cirrus Derby from 1930.
Yeah. Okay. He would have designed that too. Yes.
Yeah. So he designed those, and he flew. As you point out, he test flew his own designs, which was really a special thing about him. And then flew in races as well. And then he left there. And I understand the issue is the Granvilles just didn't pay him or couldn't pay people as much, and he had to leave. So he started his own company right across the river, and at Matt's favorite airport, Bulls-Agawam Airport, and created the Springfield Aircraft Company. And that's where he made the Cicada we've already talked about, the Bulldog a little bit. I think everybody who's watched this probably knows about that. Also, the Bulldog Junior. Do you know anything about that aircraft by any chance, Eric?
I'm not sure a Bulldog Junior ever was built.
Mm-hmm.
I just and Jim Jenkins talks about it. I know that I've got drawings, and they're actually framed on the wall. He designed something in early 1933 that was a inline engine small racer with retractable gear, but that thing never got built. And but I don't think there's photographs or anything of a small Bulldog. I think people talked about it, but it never happened, I'm pretty sure.
In any case, after that, we had the crash somewhere in that. We had the crash of the Cicada, which ended the Springfield Aircraft Company. Effectively,
Right.
That was the end of it. Matt, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
As far as the Bulldog Junior goes, there are drawings of it there that were published in the Springfield newspaper at the time. And there are accounts that they at least started construction on the plane, but it was never actually finished.
Okay, so at the Stinson, which aircraft did you design there?
He was very involved with the SR-8, what some people call the Gullwing Stinson.
Beautiful
He and
airplane.
Bob Ayer worked on that together. And that was sort of the main one he worked on, but he was engineer and test pilot there and probably worked on a lot of the planes. Hard to pin down which ones, but he was basically the aeronautical engineer there, or one of them.
And where was Stinson located at that time?
It was in Wayne, Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to Michigan.
Right.
And then going to Grumman. We're in Long Island?
Yeah, Grumman is in Bethpage, Long Island.
Yeah.
Which interestingly is 10 minutes, I would say, away from Farmingdale. So sort of getting off track a little bit. During the war, Grumman and Republic aircraft were basically 10 to 15 minutes apart. And those two companies set production records. The Grumman with the Hellcat and I think Republic even built more Thunderbolts than Grumman
Mhm.
built Hellcats, and this was in a very, very small, tight radius. You know, you could take off from the airport at Grumman and without getting too high, could glide into the airport at Republic.
Yeah.
Um,
I actually missed something about his time at Stinson, which is he bailed out of an aircraft at Stinson. And Matt, you gave me that in the notes, but I forgot to bring it up. So
Yeah.
who wants to tell that story? I don't know that story.
well, I don't know too much about it other than knowing what he was doing testing. And what he did was he was basically going to do spin tests. And the way you can do a spin test is pull a stick up hard and then go into a high-speed stall, and then it goes over on its back and starts spinning. I think that's basically how it works. And right in the middle of all this, he blew most of the covering off one wing. It just tore away, and so one wing just was useless, and he wasn't going to fly that thing home. So he and his log entries are pretty laconic, and this one was had to leave her. Did I send you a picture of that map?
It's Jim. We'll have to show you sometime, but there's a picture of the logbook, and there's a little square of fabric from the wing, and in the corner he wrote, "Lost too much of this, had to get out."
That's great.
Had to leave her, yeah.
So again, a real picture about Bob's personality from talking to you, that he's a man of few words and someone who believed in doing, not talking.
Right.
And probably didn't suffer fools gladly, as they say. Just
Boy, that's a perfect
is that it?
description.
Well,
Although
you're doing a good job
Yeah.
explaining him. Yeah. So then let's go back to where he goes to Grumman, and as you said, it's in Long Island and Bethpage, and he designed airplanes there. And what an amazing run of aircraft design!
Amazing.
It is really incredible. So he started at Stinson at Grumman in 1936, I think,
Yeah,
and
late 36, yeah.
and worked on did he work on the Goose first? Was that his first aircraft
Yes.
there?
That was
And then
that was the first design job that he had. He wasn't project engineer, but because they had a naval architect who was the project engineer, was designing basically the hull of the plane. But he was doing most of the the airplane design part of it.
and his aesthetic sense was amazing, because these are really attractive airplanes all the way through his entire career, from the Goose. Then we go to the Wildcat, which is a beautiful airplane, and probably my favorite. It's hard to pick. There's so many good airplanes that your dad did, but I've always had a soft spot for the Wildcat. I don't know why, but I just always have. I love it. I think it's a really cute and an interesting looking airplane. But if he had just done that, that would already be quite a contribution. But he also did the Avenger, the Hellcat, the Bearcat, and then went on to design jets after that, right?
Yeah, I think he certainly had a good aesthetic sense, but there were some people at Grumman who also did, and one of them was a guy named Gordon Israel, who
Mr. Mullen.
Dad knew him from racing planes.
Yeah.
He worked with Benny Howard, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, but he was kind of a little bit of a wild man, one of these typical person of the era, I might say, where he was hugely talented and just could go on benders, I mean, really have fun drinking. And but Gordon, again, in one of the interviews, Gordon penned the lines of the Tiger Cat, which I think is a gorgeous plane, and the Grumman Panther, which is a gorgeous plane. I think those are the two most beautiful Grumman planes of the era, certainly. I mean, they were just beautiful aircraft. I mean, I have a real good reason to like the Tiger Cat. I like to say that its first flight was postponed because I was born.
Oh, nice.
It flew on the 2nd of November, and my birthday is the 29th of October. So again, there's nothing to prove that wrong. That plane, though, is that's Dad's favorite Grumman plane. And
mine too.
I don't.
It sounded like the Wildcat, but I forgot about the Bearcat when I said that. I like all of them.
The Bearcat's interesting because Leroy Grumman and Bud Gillies flew in the middle of the war to England because a German pilot either defected or got lost and landed in England. Nobody's ever been able to actually determine whether he was defecting or just was lost. And I had a little fun with that in the book. But it was the Focke-Wulf 190. And he thought that plane was really a good plane. He said he said that the cockpit layout was beautiful and close to perfection. And they basically copied the concept of the plane, which was smaller than, say, the Thunderbolts and the Hellcats. And they went back after flying the plane and said, we got to build a plane like that, but better. And so the Bearcat was definitely inspired by the Focke-Wulf 190. And I kind of like that
I can see
story
that.
because when I was a college student, I took a semester off and worked in Germany in a place called, well, it was in Bremen, but it was across the river from Bremen at a yacht builder called Abiking and Rasmussen. But just down the streets where that plane, all those Focke-Wulfs were built, and at the Focke-Wulf factory was practically within walking distance of that yacht builder. And so it's kind of interesting connect there. That picture you just had up must have been the only picture like that, because that was the day of the first flight, and you can see there's no dorsal fin on the rudder or on the rudder, and he flew it. And famously, Corky Myers said, except when he came down, he said, "Guys, take it back to the barn. We have to work on it." So I guess he lengthened the stabilizer and put a dorsal fin on the rudder, which he also had to do on the Avenger. And apparently Boeing was famous until recent years for putting a dorsal fin on every plane they ever built. They always needed one. I guess this is.
He had a history of designing airplanes with the vertical stabilizer a bit too small then, because obviously in this channel, everyone knows the Bulldog had a small tail at the beginning, then he had to grow a little bit over time. So it's very much the same story. Yeah.
That's true. I didn't even think of that, but yeah, everything seems to the tail fin and the rudder all have to grow when the first flight is done.
But I mean, it makes sense because you don't know how much you need. It's very hard, probably especially at time, to calculate that in advance. You might have an idea, you're getting close, but why wouldn't you err on the side of caution and add material if you need it? It makes sense to me. And then so he went from he did this these amazing airplanes we talked about. Did he have a part in the Tiger Cat also? Did you say?
Oh yeah.
He did. Okay, so that was his aircraft also. I didn't know that for sure. And then Matt gave me another note about the XP-50, which he was involved in a crash in that as well, I guess.
Yep.
So what happened there?
He was testing it, I guess doing some dive tests. It really wasn't related, but all of a sudden heard a pop. And didn't know what it was, but when he decided to come, he kept flying around, nothing, didn't seem like anything was wrong. But I guess the engine didn't sound right. But then he went to go back to Grumman and dropped the main gear, because the main gear dropped from forward to back. And so as soon as they got out in the wind, they went back and locked. But the tricycle landing gear, which was the first plane with a tricycle landing gear that Grumman built, it deployed going forward, and because the hydraulic, but it wouldn't deploy, and so he had to he couldn't land the plane at Grumman, because if he did, as soon as the plane settled, it would settle on its nose and probably flip over its back or break the nose off, and his prospects for surviving that nobody thought were very good. And so he was ordered to take the thing over Long Island Sound and bail out. It was interesting that my mother could have watched all this, because he bailed out right up out in front of the house. Of course,
why not? So he can be home for dinner that way.
Yeah. So he bailed out off Eaton's Neck, sort of between Eaton's Neck on the one side and Target Rock on the other side of Huntington Bay. Got the plane going in the direction away from Long Island, and then he apparently climbed out of the plane, and because he didn't want to jump off and hit the stabilizer. So he climbed out and then slipped off either behind the stabilizer or something like that, and then went into the drink. And it was early May 1941. An interesting postscript to that is, this makes it a long story, but I'm a hockey player, and in 2011, I was going out to actually, no, I guess it was really on my way to New Zealand for business. But anyway, stopped off in Seattle and met a hockey player friend of mine. And we, just on that weekend, we were, there was a really good presentation about Grumman airplanes and the aerodynamics and everything. A guy there, when I forget his name, was really, really an expert at Grumman airplanes and the aerodynamics. And I'm sitting there, and before we got there, and before he started, but the slideshow was already up on the screen, and it was May 7th, 2011, and a shiver went up my spine. And the Tiger, the XP50s, the reason it crashed was because the turbocharger vane ripped away and flew out of the airplane, and on its way it cut the hydraulic things. And interestingly enough, that thing, when it was fluttering down, it fell on near a beach, and some kid picked it up, and then they brought it home, and then they read about the crash and called Grumman and said, maybe we have a piece of your airplane, and it turned out it was, and it was this.
I was just looking at that in the background. I thought that might have been something.
Huh. And that's it.
But check out that date, or excuse me, when I was in Seattle, it was May 14th, 2011.
Oh.
So this guy was putting on his talk probably to the minute, whatever 1941 to 2011 was. You do the arithmetic.
Yeah.
But I had this with me because I wanted to show it to a guy that has a aircraft museum there, which had a tiger cat and a bear cat in it. So anyway, that was interesting about that. But this, you can see that we're ripped.
Yeah.
And actually,
yeah.
And he didn't keep anything from the Stinson bailout, but in back of me, the framed picture of the XP50 has his ripcord in the frame as well. So
he developed a little bit of nostalgia later in his life, a little bit after too bad he didn't have some of that for the racing period, but he kind of held on to a few items. It's good to hear.
Yeah.
When he got into the 1940s.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And then, did he ever talk about the bailout or any of those kinds of things? These things he ever mentioned to you? Have you heard about this? No, he just didn't.
No, my godfather was a guy named King Graves, and Matt has read my manuscript and probably recognizes the name. King was my godfather, and while he was an expert cabinet maker, amateur cabinet maker. So we decided we were going to make a chest of drawers for my coming child, who we didn't know was a girl or a boy, wasn't born yet. My daughter Deanie actually. And so we made this beautiful chest of drawers, but we would talk. And he'd tell me all about the old man, and he told me what they did after this crash and other mishaps. That he'd grab King and say, "Come with me. We're gonna go get drunk." And he was a growler kind of thing. So they'd go off and anchor the boat someplace and just get completely shit-faced, or he did. And that would be a way of him sort of coming down afterward, because he didn't he didn't say much about this stuff, but it still must have. I'm
Sure.
sure it shocked him, and King said it did. He had his own way of,
Maybe you said at the very beginning of this discussion that your dad had, the first thing you said about your dad was that he could have an explosive temper, which sounds, you admit it sounds like a really bad thing. But I think maybe one compassionate way to look at your dad was that he was protecting you both from that and from the fear that you would have had if you had heard all these stories when you were young. You wouldn't have been as adventurous as you wanted you to be. You wouldn't have tried as many things as you wanted. And it was his way of protecting you. What do you think of that thought?
he probably would have been worried that we wanted to copy him.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I don't think he was concerned. He didn't worry about us. The reason he didn't talk about anything was just because he didn't think it was important.
It's just as boring to him.
It just good. All right, so I did that. He'd
Yeah.
rather talk about what's coming.
Okay. All right. That's good too. If that's the way it
What
went.
courses are you taking next year, Eric?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, rather. Or where are we going to go cruising on the boat next year?
Yeah. He was just living his life and busy.
I just, and it's such a regret that I didn't interview him more, but people have, and there's a lot of actually good verbal history with him, and some of it's a lot of fun.
We do have one audio recording of him. That's the only one we have. Maybe we can find some more through you. I'm sure Matt has already worked with you on that. Let me just keep moving forward with his career. Now he's worked at Grumman, made it through the war period. The Bearcat and the Tiger Cat and all those propeller aircraft are done. And now Grumman turns his attention to jet aircraft. Your dad was instrumental in the design of some amazing, beautiful aircraft there as well, including the F-9F Panther, the Cougar as well, and then the Jaguar and the F-11F Tiger. And those are all really, really neat aircraft. So your dad was he lead engineer on those as well?
I think as time went by, he became more of an executive. Like he went from chief engineer to vice president of engineering. And I think that as time went by, he got further and further away from the actual design of the planes. I think probably, I remember that we always would race in the Bermuda race. But one year he couldn't go in 1954 because they were testing the Tiger that year.
Mm-hmm.
It was always fun to talk about because my mother had one more Bermuda race under her belt than he did because she always came with us. So, but he had to, and I don't remember that. Oh yes, he was very, very close to the design of the Gulfstream.
Yeah.
Especially the G1.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if he had something to do with naming it, just because when you race to Bermuda, you're racing the Gulfstream.
Oh, the Gulfstream. Yeah,
and
sure.
Grumman and Gulfstream, it was alliterative. So
yeah,
maybe. But I know he had a lot to do with that plane. I remember him going to up to Canada to talk about Rolls-Royce engines. The Panther started with a Rolls-Royce NEN engine, but wasn't allowed to use it. They had to have it made in this country under license. But the engines, certainly in the Gulfstream 1, were always Rolls-Royce engines.
Okay, so all the way through now, we've taken him all the way his career, all the way through the Gulfstream 1, which I think sort of ends the story at Grumman, and he retired in 1970. As I understand it. And then did he continue living in that area for the rest of his life?
Yes, well, a lot of it, and then moved to Hilton Head.
Okay.
And then eventually moved back to a condominium in Newport.
And he and your mother stayed together?
Yes.
And when did she pass?
1998, I believe.
Okay, so he actually predeceased her. He
Right.
died in 1991, and so your dad, did he stay? We have a couple of interviews with him or things we've heard from this period in the 80s, and where your dad was remembering details from the 30s. Was his memory really trustworthy all the way to the end of his life? Would you say?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. He said some things that kind of, to me, resolved some conflicts people have had about the aircraft they were building. And some things that kind of make us a little confused, but it's good to know that we can rely on his word about that stuff. Okay, so what did he do? He had 21 years of retirement. That's great. That's what everyone dreams of. what did he do to pass the time? Did he continue making things? Was he?
Yeah.
He liked to putter around. You mentioned he built that engine. That's a
Yeah.
great story.
When he moved back to Newport, he really couldn't continue anything anymore, so he didn't. But he had and he didn't have a workshop in the condominium in Newport. But in Hilton Head, it had a very nice condominium and had a lot to do with solar heating. He was very interested in that, had solar heating in the house, and I think he probably may have repped a little bit in solar heating, but he also had the shop, and he made stuff in his shop.
That's great.
In Hilton Head as well.
That's great. So he's an engineer all the way through.
Yeah, his pastime was if sailing certainly, but his day-to-day or weekend-to-weekend pastime was working in the cellar in the shop, either making things, or he was also a photographer and spent a lot of time in his dark room developing pictures.
So what would your dad's advice to me be as I set out on this project? What would he say?
He would probably tell you to be very careful building it,
Mm-hmm.
and have good sound mechanics working with you on it that knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think though, less than what he would really tell you is, and that would be if you were considering flying it.
Mm-hmm.
He would say, do your homework flying. Fly a lot, do aerobatics, do it a lot, really get to know real flying.
Yeah.
Because he was very dismissive of the pilots in his era who said they didn't do their homework, they didn't do flying. In fact, he commented on Sanford Granville's fatal crash, and he said he just didn't take the time to really learn how to fly. And
Yeah.
Dad, and all this crazy stuff going on at Granville anyway, he'd fly every day.
Yeah.
And he'd fly and he'd get a feel for what the airplanes were doing. One time he wanted to sort of figure out what it would be like on one of the early planes to maybe put the CG too far aft. So he put a little weights in the back of the plane and got into trouble flying, went into a spin, and was going to have his first bailout. Interestingly, though, he stood up and started to get ready for a bailout, and the stand up, stop the spin. Don't ask me about the aerodynamics of that, but he lived. The plane was saved, and he could land it again. But anyway, he said, and he was also very dismissive of all these people saying that these planes were killers.
Yeah.
They were killers, but he said, you take any naval aviator, and they would have had no trouble with these planes at all.
Yeah.
It's just these people did not know how to fly, and they didn't take the time to learn.
Yeah.
He never commented on Russell Thaw ever, but I think Russell Thaw was one of these people that he just was over his head when it came to flying the Bulldog. I think he was probably, well, I don't know if this is, if people are going to watch this, I probably shouldn't say that, but I think the expression he uses probably scared shitless of the plane.
Yeah.
And where a guy like Jim would know what he was doing with the plane, because he's learned so much about the plane and learned so much about flying planes like it, and spent his time and done his time.
Yeah.
And done his, paid his dues flying. And so he would probably tell you to make sure, don't fly it if you're not a really, really good pilot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good advice. We won't know if I'm a really good pilot until I fly it, I suppose. But I do have a lot of aerobatic experience, and I take this very seriously. I do fly it every day as much as I can, just like your father. I think we would have been we would have understood each other.
Jim, you and I had talked about, the end of the original Bulldog and how it had been left behind in Cleveland, and how you had told me that it didn't seem like that would fit for an engineer who would want to go back and fix it and improve upon the design. And that's, I think, where you and I had both discussed, that he just didn't own the plane anymore. So it wasn't his responsibility to go back and fix it. And I think, Eric, what you just said really sort of lends to that. I don't know if you want to call it a theory, but as to why the Bulldog never proceeded after 32 there, because, he didn't own the plane anymore. So there was no need to go back and make those adjustments that I'm sure he would have done had he continued on with it.
Hard to say. I mean, I think there was probably a lot of finality at the end of the air races, and what on the one hand, what good would it have done to try to make it any better because the races were over? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, he did have a handful and a responsibility to Frank Lynch with the Cicada. And the right day after the races, the logbook says he flew it back, and you told me you understood he flew back with Frank in the plane back to Springfield. So and he wasn't invited to say, okay, good, the plane wasn't good, but let's make it better, and maybe we can make it better for next year or something like that. Nothing like that, I don't think, ever happened. And so he wasn't invited to do any more work on it. And since he wasn't, I guess there's nothing else to do but fly home.
Yeah, that sounds like the job. You said this was a job to him, and the job was over.
Yeah.
So if it's that simple, and it sounds like it might be, I think that kind of settles it, Matt. It's just that's his character makes sense to me as an engineer. I like everything that Eric is telling me about this person. Someone who can admit mistakes. That's a really strong thing, really strong quality, and somebody who's competent and likes to be careful and takes risks, but manages them, right? And doesn't look back, looks ahead.
Yeah.
What a neat person.
Yeah.
Eric, thank you so much for being with us. It was great.
Okay.
Thanks for the number of dirty jokes you told that we're not going to include. And it's really great to learn so much about your dad. Very, very, very helpful. And, you might not, a couple of times this interview, you sounded like you didn't really feel like you had a lot to share, but you did, because you explained to us who Bob was and how he thought and what made him tick a little bit. And just to get that insight helps me understand things about the airplane and what Bob, I have a little voice in my head of what Bob would tell me. That's going to guide me a lot as we work through this. So thank you very much for being a part of this, and please keep in touch. We'd love to hear back from you, and hopefully we'll be able to show you a flying airplane in a couple of years. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. All right, you guys, thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks,
Great. Thank you very much for putting this on.
You bet, Eric. Good to meet you. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Now, how did your test piloting and engineering work together in design? What was your role in the Grumman Wildcat, for example, which was the Navy shipboard fighter?
Well, let me begin in another way. I first worked for Fairchild in Farmingdale as a junior engineer right out of college. That's where I went when I graduated from college. And I had a boss that I was very, very respectful and fond of. And here comes in to the office swashbuckling pilot flying one of Fairchild airplanes, and he wanted something done to it. Don't remember what, but my boss said, no, that's not a good idea. I don't think we should do that. And this guy said to my boss, are you a pilot? And he had to say no, and that was the end of that. So the guy got his way. I said, that's never going to happen to me. So I went right out and learned to fly.